let's go to Melbourne and get some common sense from Donna Demaio. She is the senior reporter and newsreader at 3AW. Donna, very good morning to you. Welcome. Well, good afternoon in your case, probably.
Good evening, in fact.
Good evening.
For me, but nice to speak with you, Mike.
Yeah, very nice to speak to you. Sorry to keep you waiting. You know what these cyclists are like. They like to monopolise the conversation. Tell us about what's been going on in Melbourne, because you had a lockdown, a sort of second strain lockdown, I guess. But there's a bit of controversy going on about the wearing of masks, I understand.
Absolutely. Well, currently there are millions of people in Melbourne under stage 3 restrictions. Effectively, there are some very limited reasons you can leave your home, but we are pretty much in lockdown because of this second wave. And every day there's hundreds of new cases of COVID-19. Yesterday it was more than 500. Today it was just under 400. So naturally authorities are very concerned about that. But it was last week when the mask rule came into effect. So it's been about 6 days or so that if you refuse to wear a face covering, you risk being fined about $200, which is a fair whack.
Sure.
So police have been issuing these fines, but there's been an interesting phenomenon. We know that social media is all pervasive, and excuse the pun, but these people have gone viral on social media because what they've done is they've filmed themselves in these verbal confrontations with retail staff. So there's quite a number of stores that have said, if you don't wear a mask, you cannot come in. And there's one woman who's particularly got a lot of attention, and she's even got her own hashtag, mind you, Mike, hashtag Bunnings Karen.
Okay.
And her name is Kerry Nash. And what she did is she did film herself arguing with an employee of a big hardware store called Bunnings. And so she was saying, well, you know, you're actually, it's unlawful. You're discriminating against me. And she was threatening to sue. She said that that it was an unauthorised condition of entry, that she was allowed to enter without a mask. Well, the Premier, Daniel Andrews, the Premier of Victoria, not impressed with her behaviour at all. And police also saying that it's a selfish behaviour in regard to putting, yourself ahead of the health of all others that happen to live in this state. So it's been interesting that the debate has been very, very strong and heated in some cases in regard to whether it is a breach of human rights whether you're being asked to wear a mask or not when you exit your home.
Right. I mean, here in this country, Donna, we've got a sort of series of exemptions, which can include things like it makes me anxious to wear a mask, which technically speaking gets you off the hook. Do they not have those exemptions there?
Oh, there are exemptions, of course. You know, there's people with medical conditions, for instance, and that do suffer anxiety and so forth. That's okay, and I do believe that police would accept that as an excuse or a reason as to why you're not wearing a mask. This woman just point blank refused in regard to saying that her human rights were being breached. We actually heard from the Human Rights Law Centre, and Hugh de Kretser says, well, actually, being required to wear a mask in public in Melbourne at the moment does not breach human rights. He called it, it's a small limit on personal freedom for a very good reason. They're trying to save lives and protect public health. But it's not only this woman, this Kerry Nash, also called Bunnings Karen. In fact, there's been quite a number of people that are flouting the laws, let's say, this guideline to actually wear the mask in public. And then they're filming it, and that's what's really riling people up, because then police have said this is not great because people will, follow suit, so to speak. And as we know, there's a few conspiracy theorists,
yes,
and their position is quite strong on, where this virus even started, and they have all sorts of views. And so there has been quite a lot of backlash, let's say, in regard to these people publishing and spreading their views.
Yes, because I mean there is that
sort of
there is that view abroad, isn't there, which is relatively minority based, I would say, in terms of the number of people who actually believe it. But that the mask is the thin end of the wedge, and it's going to end up with people holding you down and vaccinating you and somehow taking over your mind. I mean, it's a kind of a madness that people suffer from. But tell me this, Donna, what are people saying about how it is that the coronavirus sort of second wave has come about? What's caused it?
Oh, interesting you should mention that, because there's all sorts of questions being asked about when there was a hotel quarantine program initiated, and when all returned travellers, people came home from overseas, they were put in hotel quarantine, but the system fell apart when security guards that perhaps weren't briefed and weren't implementing the safety measures that they should have been, they were a little bit lax, basically. So there was a huge outbreak of COVID-19 in the hotel quarantine hotels. There's also been, unfortunately and devastatingly, a lot of people in aged care homes. There's huge numbers. I think it's about 61 aged care homes in Victoria alone, and about 800 elderly actually now have COVID, their current COVID cases. So very distressing for all family members, of course. And there's questions being asked now about how this came to be, because we were doing pretty well just a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I mean, Australia was one of the beacons of sort of hope, wasn't it? It was one of the places where they'd shut down all sort of incoming air travel, apart from people coming back home, and they'd stopped visitors, and they seemingly had cleared COVID from the entire continent, but I guess not.
Well, New South Wales and other states are doing way better than Victoria, I will say. But unfortunately, these latest huge outbreaks, it's looking pretty dire for Melbourne. We're talking about looking down the barrel of many, many more months of these stage 3 restrictions, because unfortunately, some suggest that there was a little bit of complacency that settled in, and people weren't being as, careful, let's say, and hence that second wave. Even the state government did not want to call it a second wave for quite a while. It was as if they said it out loud, it was a reality. But unfortunately, it is officially a second wave, because we are getting these huge numbers now, and unfortunately, breaking the daily record quite often. So it's quite alarming, but hopefully we can get on top of it sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Donna, thanks very much indeed. Donna Demaio, senior reporter in Newsreader at 3AW in Melbourne, where they've got a second spike, where a lot of people are upset about wearing masks, where there's been all manner of difficulties. We haven't had those here. There are plenty of people here who don't want to wear masks, and many people would say that they should. I'm not one of them. If you don't want to wear a mask, don't wear one. Nobody's making you. It's not compulsory. And if any shop tells you can't come in because you're not wearing one, then just don't go in. Go find another shop. There are plenty of shops that will let you in without a mask. I went to the shops yesterday. There were plenty of people inside the shop who weren't wearing masks. Not everybody's doing it, because basically it's all about personal choice.